Okay, so I'm going to talk about deloading this week. I've just got some footage up there of a meetup that we did at a gym a couple of years ago during my last off season. So that's going to be playing in the background while I'm talking about this. Um, I'm just deloading at the moment. I've reached the end of a training block. I'm deloading and tapering, and then I'm going to start a new block. So I had put up a video on Instagram, and I had received a number of questions about how do I deload, how often do I deload, etc. So I thought I'd include some of those questions in this video and do a little bit of an instructional video about how I put together a deload. The purpose of deloading is primarily recovery. If you've been training hard for a while, you're going to find that it takes a toll on your body. It's going to, you might find that your joints start hurting, you get some bumps and bruises. Tendons and muscles also can, get sore, become strained, and that type of thing after a while. As well as performance, your nervous system can be affected. Performance and strength can start to drop, especially if you're pushing volume up very high. So, a recovery strategy is one of the recovery strategies is a deload. It's just giving all of those things, as well as maybe your mind a little bit of a break from continuously pushing yourself hard in the gym, giving yourself a little bit of rest and recovery. So how do I deload? I generally reduce the percentage of the weight that I normally lift to 85 to 90%. I also typically will reduce my reps to the lower end of whatever rep range I usually use. So, for example, if I normally use 100 kilos, I'm going to drop it down to 85 to 90 kilos. And if I usually do 8 to 12 reps, I'm going to do 8 reps for all of my sets. So I'm going to be stopping well short of failure, and it's going to feel pretty easy. Generally, I also reduce the number of sets that I do by 1. So if I normally do 3 sets, I'm going to do 2 sets on that week. That's just the structure that I use for deloading right now. I've used other structures in the past. What I would recommend for most people is they use anywhere between 60 to 90% of the weight that they usually use for that particular exercise that they're deloading on. And they should, again, aim for the lower end of the rep range they usually work in, just like that example I gave with the 8 to 12 rep range. So if they're normally doing 100 kilos, they're going to use anywhere between 60 to 90 kilos. Okay. How often should somebody deload? It's really going to depend on the structure that you have in place in your program. So if you are pushing some one or more variables like volume or intensity or frequency high early on, you might not be able to last that long without kind of really needing to deload. If you're kind of gradually, if you're gradually increasing either the intensity or the volume over time, and it's kind of taking a little bit of a time to accumulate fatigue, then you might deload a little bit later on. It's also going to depend on your training age and how accustomed you are to particular training variables like volume and that type of thing. So what I like to recommend is to deload every 4 to 10 weeks. Anywhere between that range is pretty good, give or take. It could be a couple of weeks, give or take, but 4 to 10 weeks, every 4 to 10 weeks, do a deload week is what I would recommend. So how long should a deload week be? I generally like to recommend just 1 week of deloading. I have had people, and I have personally deloaded for less time. Sometimes you only need a couple of days to kind of, recover. Sometimes you might actually need a couple of weeks. I generally wouldn't expect that most people need more than 2 weeks unless they're very overreached. And of course, if you're overtrained, you might need even longer than that. Another question that I get is, why don't I just take a week off instead of deloading? And the reason is mainly detraining the adaptations that you've accumulated whilst you've been training hard. If you're taking a week off, you're probably not really going to lose a huge amount of those strength and muscle adaptations. But I would personally rather be in the gym, still working at a low intensity, and have a higher likelihood of maintaining what I've attained at that point. Another thing is, if you've been, if you're going on vacation, or if you are, if you have a little injury or something like that, or if you're just not mentally in it at that time, and you need to kind of give yourself a little bit of a break from the gym, that's fine. You can take a week off. It's not going to kill you. But ideal situation is you deload rather than take a week off. I just kind of touched on this, but will you lose muscle if you deload working at lower intensities? In my experience, no. If you're more advanced, you're probably going to be less likely to lose muscle than somebody who is, really new to training. Strength and muscle adaptations can, be lost a little bit faster for people who are newer, but it's really not a long period of time. 1 week, of training light, you're not going to really lose any muscle, so I wouldn't worry about that. And another thing that I've personally experienced and that I get asked is, well, what if I don't really feel like I need a deload? I'm just, going along training. And that might actually be the case. You might not be training hard enough for long enough that you need to deload. But sometimes it's the opposite way around as well. It can be just that you're used to feeling that way, and you don't realize that if you did apply a deload or used a recovery strategy of some kind, that your performance and strength would actually go up afterwards. And it's just that you're so used to training, for a long time using the same weights, and you think, well, my recovery is not down, my strength is not down, but it might be a little bit down, and you could be performing a little bit better with a little bit of recovery. And so the last thing is what are the differences between deloads and tapers? A deload is typically a reduction in intensity, sometimes a bit of a change in volume. Like I mentioned, I usually reduce my sets by 1. That's a change in volume, pretty slight. But a taper is a little bit different. It's you keep the intensity high. In fact, sometimes you would actually increase the weights that you're using, and you would just reduce the volume. You might cut it in half. So you might do, instead of doing 4 sets, you might do 2 sets per exercise. Both of them are recovery strategies, and both of them can be used either separately or together. I usually like to deload for 1 week and then taper for at least 1 week, and I find that my strength will typically go up, and I'm not only feeling better, but I'm performing better in the gym. So that's the end of this video, guys. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it. Remember to subscribe as well. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you in the next video.